games business has grown up a lot since I got into it, more or less by accident. The accident was that we used to play games occasionally at home, very occasionally, and I was never very good at it because my father could always beat me because he was very much better strategy game player than I was. So I decided that the way out of this was to design games that he hadn't seen before, but I had, and knew how to play them, and he didn't. But of course that's something you can only follow up to a point. Under the new system, it is most important that anyone intending to sell a home-produced X-XX type game should apply in advance to be suitably licensed by Heartland Tresham Limited. That assumes they can find Heartland Tresham Limited, which I don't know that I could. And then it's something about new production. Kits out quite soon, given half a dozen years or so. Yes, Unit 2 would be imminent if it wasn't for changeover from PC to Apple system software. Oh yes, gosh.
I heard you had a problem with a Apple II printer or something along those lines.
Have problem with anything that's got computers in it. Follows automatically. Yes, but there we are.
So all right, let me do my little intro that I have for you, and then I'll start asking you a bunch of questions.
By all means. Yes,
all
carry
right.
on.
Okay, all right.
Put that down and then it won't distract you.
And there we are.
All right. So.
And you are?
I'm Edward Euler. And you are
Edward.
Francis. Yes, Edward.
And I'm Francis.
Yeah,
yes.
you are Francis. That is. All
now
right.
we know. Yes.
All right. So welcome to Heavy Core. Yes. I have my notes for a reason here. So.
Oh, we've got notes, have we?
We do. Well, I have notes. You have your memory.
That's like the two fat ladies on television. They insisted that they ran to a script.
No, this is just a reminder of what questions to ask you. They took one look at the
script and said, we're not reading that. And they said, well, you can do what you like, but you'll soon need the script. And they sort of proved them wrong.
Right.
No, they were far more interesting without the script. Yes,
Noted.
which of course all good interviews should be. Welcome to Civilizations with Heavy Cardboard. I'm honoured and quite excited to welcome one of the most important. I didn't know you were one of the most important in well, we do meet people, don't we?
Oh no, please continue.
He's the man who created civilization. I thought that was the ancient somebody or others. Romans probably. No, not Romans. They came into it late in the day, didn't they? It was the Abyssinians?
Mesopotamians.
The what?
Mesopotamians.
Mesopotamians, so my wife says. Well, she was no doubt there at the time, but I wasn't. There we are. Don't cough while reading into the microphone.
No, here, just there you go. There you go.
Why trains?
Yeah.
Given your engineering background and interest in buses, had you given thought to designing a game with Leyland buses? Well, yes, but not with Leyland buses. They're shocking old things, they are. Bristol, possibly. Or, well...
This is
what
either going to be
interesting
the
rules
most
were initially in the
amazing thing
original
in
design of 18XX games that didn't make the final cut? What new mechanisms, new mechanics are your favourites? Just having survived it, I suppose, really. Yes, it was all good fun, wasn't it? What was the development process like with your games? Well, 1829 was certainly largely coincidence.
Okay, tell me about that. Tell me about it.
What about 1829?
Sure, start there.
Oh yes, I can tell you about it. I don't know whether anybody's very interested. We were doing a board. No, we weren't. We were going to have a party that evening. That's right. And I had a board upstairs designed for a game, but never actually got as far as a coloured mock-up. It was just black and white hexagon tiles. It was supposed to be a game based on the legends of the Arabian Nights.
Okay.
But as none of the people there knew very much about the Arabian Nights, and I certainly didn't. And the legend got around that the Arabian Nights was very much an ancestral series of, folklore, really. But one of the people attending the party worked on the railways, and one of the others was a railway enthusiast. So with 24 hours in hand, I redesigned the game to use as much as I could out of railways, thinking, well, there's two people here who know what they're doing, you see. Well, they did, as it happened, because the one who was a railway enthusiast finishing second, and the one who worked on the railways ended up finishing last, which everybody said was entirely appropriate. And we were in business. And the best method I could think of designing a game quickly was to use benzene ring chemical formulations with hexagons. And it's quite easy to redesign benzene ring chemical compounds into 18xx tiles. I recommend it to you. You should try it sometime. It works a treat. But don't try and do it with complex 5 or 6-sided molecules. You're getting a terrible mess if you do. I would advise you to stick to regular hexagons, which is quite daunting enough.
So that's how you started
That's
with
how we
hexes.
started, yes.
Huh.
And that was and it worked very well. As I say, the railway enthusiast ended up finishing second, and the man who worked on the railways ended up finishing last. And of the 6 people present, 2 were wives of 2 of the men who were there, and one of the wives won the game because she had a housekeeper's business sense of home economics, etc., and put that to the test, and it served her well, and she won. And the other wife of somebody there didn't quite pip the accountant who finished second, and he then became the accountant of Tresham Games Limited by a long and tedious process. So she finished third. So out of the 6 people there, the women finished first and third. Now, that surprised me a bit at the time, but it doesn't surprise me now because I just know how bright women are. And Eileen tends to introduce new women into our family circle at regular intervals, and it's enormously to my pleasure to meet them. And I've just met another new one today.
So 1829 started out as Legends of the Arabian Nights.
No, the board did.
Oh, the board did.
It was only a hexag grid.
So where did the inspiration for 1829 come from to begin with? How did you even come up with the idea?
Well, 1829. Well, we just lobbed it. I had to have a title of some sort, and we chose the date of the first public railway in Britain. We weren't quite right, actually, because 1825 was the first one.
Right.
But 1825 was a private company, whereas 1829 was a
public.
Well, yes. It gets difficult if you want to get into the finer details, and
So, but what inspired you to start designing the game to begin with?
I suppose you could say, of course, it was there, and we didn't have much time for second thoughts.
So, but it was a whole new concept. I mean, But where did that come from? I guess is what I'm asking.
Dire emergency. We needed a game. We got about 6 hours to do it. I was familiar with benzene ring chemistry in the broadest possible terms. We had a board with hexagons on it.
And just like that, yes. 1829 was born.
Threw it in, yes.
Okay, so
don't try and do it again. It's been done.
So where did development and before it actually got published? How did that
It needed very little. It more or less developed itself. It was such an obvious runner right from the start that all you needed to do was to open the box and show people, this is the board you play on, these are the tiles you lay, you use these to make railway lines, you buy railway engines from the bank, and you run trains and you get paid a dividend according. No, you didn't get paid a dividend in those days, you just get paid net. for the routes you ran. And then, now that's the key, of course. That was only sufficient if it was a symmetric board, because otherwise somebody would have a huge advantage, because they would have an advantageous position on a geographic map, an advantageous position due to the proximity of large cities or something like that.
That makes sense.
Yes, well, you can't avoid that sort of conclusion. So we then had a mad scheme, and it was a mad scheme. We were going to try it one evening round at my house. We were going to play Monopoly, Totopoly, what was then the railway game, which hadn't yet got a title, and a long obsolete Pips game called Marketeer, where you had shares in various companies, not railway companies, just shares on the board.
Right.
And so, well, as a test rig, a friend of mine, he was actually the accountant, and I did a test session one evening using the Pips game of Marketeer and grafted the railways onto it just to see what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we went home that night convinced we'd been somewhere we'd never been before and didn't expect to be there anyway. And it was so obvious that what we'd seen was the future.
So that's where the shares come from.
Yes. And right from day one, hour one, minute one, it ran.
And it worked.
It worked.
Huh.
It worked brilliantly.
So
and then, of course, the field was open. You could have a board that was asymmetric as you liked, because everybody got an equal share, more or less, in what shares they bought.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't matter whether it was somebody like the Lancashire and Yorkshire, whether it's small company in geographic terms, with large cities all clustered around it, or whether it's somewhere like Great Western that goes for miles. And as somebody very rudely said of the Great Western, it's Britain's most important branch line. It was a good job no Great Western enthusiast heard them say that. But you see what I mean?
Sure.
It didn't matter how concentrated they were.
Mm-hmm.
It worked because you'd all got an equal share of buying the shares. That was all it needed.
And from there, 1829 just came together.
Yes.
Okay.
Made
all right.
history. Yes.
So what kind of games did you play growing up?
All sorts of things. Snakes and ladders onwards.
Right.
Yes. Monopoly was my favourite, but parents didn't like that because I tended to win at Monopoly, and they didn't like being driven out of business.
Okay.
I never do like Monopoly. I don't know why. There's not as much skill in it as people think there is, actually. But there are some good adult games that have gone below the surface. Totopoly, which was based on horse racing,
Mm-hmm.
had the potential for being good, but only if you totally change the rules.
So take the game,
Change them beyond
completely
recognition.
change the
Yes,
rules,
that's right,
and make
change
a
the
good
rules.
game. All right.
Of course, in Totopoly, you had this horse race, but the horse race was virtually decoration compared with what you did in order to get the horses to the race course. And in the end, that had no effect on the game of any sort at all. So what we did, we changed the rules. We put the entire bank into a fund at the end and divided it 50%, 25%, 10%, so on down, according to how much money people had at the finish, and that was the score. And from then onwards, I mean, if you had a really successful day as the forage merchant or the vet, you weren't concerned very much with whether you won the horse race or not, because you made more money than the people who did. And from then onwards, new game.
So was that the first game that you redesigned or designed? Was that?
It was the most drastic one.
Okay.
Yes, that was an extremely drastic one. But no, you see, the point was we had very few commercial instincts at all. We were doing it for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was fun, we'd play it again. And if it was real fun, we would iron out the bugs as we went along. And there were some that were very good. Buccaneer of Waddington's at that time was pretty good, and there wasn't much that you needed to do to Buccaneer to make it
a better
slightly
game.
better.
Okay.
But it didn't need anything drastic doing to it. It was basically a sound, playable game. Cluedo even more so. Never did anything to Cluedo. It was a brilliant game. Have you ever played it?
I'm familiar with that. I haven't played it though. No.
You haven't? Play it sometime.
Okay. Yes, sir.
It is very, very good. And the great thing about it, in my mind, is that you don't need to be a dedicated games player to realise it's good, nor do you need to be a dedicated games player to realise how you play it pretty quickly. And somebody who just thinks they know how to play games is sat on by those people who happen to have a bit more up here than they do. And then you can, well, it is fun. Yes, it is really fun. And there are one or two other games that have shone as a result of,
Tinkering?
tinkering.
Yeah.
Yes, tinkering, that's it. That's
Okay.
the right word for the job. Yes, because that, otherwise that implies some sort of master touch, which I don't have. But at the same time, I can sometimes look at things and say, oh, no, that's not the way to do things. I only had to have one look at the Leyland National Bus. God, who designed that and why?
So what got you started on designing games? You said there was no commercial interest when you were tinkering with the other games.
Not in our household, no.
Right. So, but what got you started actually wanting to design games from
To design
scratch?
a game for marketing? I think one or two people from outside said, we think this would sell. And one of them was a motor racing game, which was a bit like Formula Ounce, which has been in production. I don't know how long for.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a sound game. Not a very gripping one, or a very detailed one, but it's basically a sound game. So yes, there are precedents. And the point about most of these games is that if they're good, they sell well in the first Christmas season, and they'll still sell a few the next year, and they'll perhaps sell a few the second year after that, and then they're, rubbish from then onwards. However, Tom Shaw at Avalon Hill was just totally winded by the whole thing. He said, the thing about civilization that we can't understand is why each year we sell more of them than we did the year before.
Well, speaking of civilization, how did you come up with that? How did you start
that's
with
quite
that?
easy. The Pergamon Historic Atlas. Pergamon was part of the Maxwell Empire. About whom less said the better. Well, he was all right, he was a bit of a crook, I think. But yes, Pergamon was his publishing arm, and his historic atlas got into our apprentice training school, where I was an NCO, teaching aircraft apprentices.
And this was back when you were in your military, right?
I looked at this, I thought, there's a game here.
Uh-huh.
And there was.
Well, anybody can say that, but how do you get from there to the actual game? How did that process go?
You have to be Tresham, I think, is the answer.
How did the steps go, though?
If you've got a background of playing board games that have a certain originality in them, you can very often see the genre developing in a board game that hadn't in a work on historic subject. It hadn't previously been the subject topic of a game. You have a job to find one now, because most of them have been fairly well trodden down.
Sure.
And well, don't try and design Civilization again, because about 10 or 15 different people all think they've designed Civilization, and most of them are going to end up suing each other. I advise you to keep out of it. I certainly have.
But how did it start? How did you look at the atlas and then say, oh yeah, I can make this game?
There's different coloured provinces, different centres of population, different trading routes,
Right.
different potentials, of wealth generation through, according to what you were doing, access to primary resources like copper mines and salt mines and all these sort of things. So you put these down as part of the board as objectives to go for in playing a game on this board, which was just the map.
You make it sound like it's so obvious and so simple that any.
I mean, it was.
Then, if that's the case, why wasn't it done before that?
It makes you wonder. But I think the real reason was, like the man at work, because I was still working at Division of British Leyland at that time, and we were just talking as you do in the executive canteen. You talk with whoever is sitting at the same table as you. And he said, "Oh, you make board games. That's very interesting." And he said, "Well, how do they work?" And I explained it very roughly. He said, "Well, what does the dice do?" I said, "You don't have a dice." "No." "Well, how do players know what to do next?"
So they were so conditioned to have dice and have
exactly. He couldn't consider you could have a board game without dice to tell people what to do next. And I said, "Well, you just look at the resources that are available and the opportunities and who's likely to attack you and who's likely to run away, and you act accordingly." "Oh."
What, was that a conscious decision to make sure that there weren't dice in there? Or
They were never needed.
So never needed, ergo
No.
never include them.
No, it was simpler without.
You make all this sound so simple and so obvious.
I don't mind doing so because it was. That's the answer. It was.
So did you ever conceive when you created Civilization that it would become the thing that it is today?
No, not really. I thought it was pretty damn good, quite frankly. And so did Tom Shaw at Civilization, Avalon Hill.
Right.
Particularly after Carol Monaco had a go at it.
Right.
"You must make this, Tom, it's good."
So tell that story. So so how did that come to be? After Heartland Tresham had made, so you had made Civilization.
Yes.
How did it go from you to Avalon Hill? How did that work?
Via Carol Monaco.
And what was that process?
Well, she was a very contented retailer of my games. So she bought a quantity of them.
Okay.
A batch of 12, I think, and perhaps somewhat surprisingly, reordered another batch of 12 or 20 a few weeks later.
Okay.
So I gathered she'd sold the ones she'd had. So I wasn't entirely surprised when I got a... That's it. I was out at a friend's house and I got a reply paid phone call from Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill? Return charges, that's what it was. He said, this man, Mr. Carver that we've mentioned here,
Right.
that was at his house actually. And I said, "Oh, well, I suppose that's all right. I mean, they're paying, not me." And he
Sure.
said, "Who is it you're talking to?" I said, "Avalon Hill." "Who?"
And then how did that? What happened at that point?
Worked extremely well.
And
Went
so,
to Gen Con and all the others.
and then
People started writing rave articles about it in magazines, and arguments used to take place, and people said, "Oh, I'll play Crete." "You'll play what? That's a loser, that is. Not the way I play it," he said. You know, you get things like this, you see. And I said the best method of winning at Civilization was to somehow engineer, and you can do this if you think about it a bit and aim in the right direction, engineer hostility between the Assyrians and the Babylonians, because they're both very powerful inherent nations. And once you've got a bit of hostility going, they'll go for each other, and the rest of you get on, and one of the rest of you is going to win the game. And that's it. That's how you win at Civilization.
or what happens though if you're the Babylonians or the Assyrians?
Well, you avoid them like the plague.
All right, so let's move over to Heartland Tresham. Where'd the name come from?
We were going to move to Heartland Point in Devon, which is on the coast there, because the person who was going to sponsor us at that stage had moved down there from, this was through Mensa, had moved down there from a very nicely positioned public house, a private house, in just over the border in Leicestershire, from where we live in Northamptonshire. And he was going to set up the deal down there, and we were going to move down there, and we were going to make board games under the title of Heartland something, Heartland Key or Heartland Quest or something like that. And it all fell to bits for all sorts of valid reasons, and I wasn't really terribly concerned, because they never carried much conviction that they were going to do it anyway.
Okay.
They were bright ideas people, you know. And one of my friends who was at one of our early meetings said something to the effect afterwards. He said, well, I'm not really surprised, because he's what I call an armchair man, and he could see that it wasn't going to go anywhere. So it became Heartland at that stage, and forget how it was then. It came back to me, I suppose. And well, trefoil is part of our family arms, dating back to the days when we decided to take an active part in politics.
Oh, all right.
And we thought that putting the House of Commons into a low elliptical orbit would secure a change of government that would be generally beneficial. It's now celebrated every November the 5th as the gunpowder plot.
Really?
Yes, really.
All righty then. All right.
So that's the trefoil bit.
Okay. So when you designed 1829, who were you designing that for?
Us.
Who's us?
Small group of people who used to meet weekly, fortnightly, monthly, play board games.
So your local group.
Yes.
Just you designed it so you guys
Yes,
had a game to
local
play,
group.
and that was it.
That's it.
And so you had no
and improved
idea.
it accordingly. Yes.
You had no idea that it would blow up to what it has become now.
Well, we didn't really know, but it drifted in that general direction.
Okay.
You know, and they were quite scandalised when they were coming back from a prom concert. I wasn't with the group that did, and they had a box of bits with them. They knew it was the game, and the game they'd played at home, or various homes of ours, not infrequently. It must have been played 6 or 10 times, I suppose. Opened up the box, and there were all the tiles in colour. What's this about? And they learnt at that point that the colour dictated which tiles could be promoted to which other tiles, which was a major step forward. Well, okay then, we'll try it, but we'll go back to the way we like sooner or later, you know. Well, of course they never did.
So at that point, when 1829 with your local group got played, everyone enjoyed it, how did it then go from there to becoming the success that it was?
Very easy. Diplomacy players held conventions at which they held diplomacy tournaments. And I used to like the company of skillful game players. So I went to one of these diplomacy tournaments. And not the first time I'd been, I had been to others. I'm not very keen on diplomacy as a game for various reasons. I don't think it's a terribly moral game, but that's immaterial. It doesn't have to be. I mean, a lot of games are highly immoral, actually, so it doesn't have to be at all. But I went to this diplomacy tournament, and I knew that one of my friends would be there who hadn't seen this previously. So I took it with me in a box, and we opened it up. We looked at it. Can we play this again next week? And no, it wasn't quite that. No, I took it with me in a box to a tournament, that's right. Went upstairs to the loom. Of course, it was a fairly long journey from where I lived to there. Somebody gave me a lift. Came down, and there were hexag tiles and goodness knows what all over the place. We're not going to play diplomacy tonight, we're going to play this. Well, I said, I don't think I've got a complete set of rules. Well, we'll have to knock it together as we go along then, won't we?
And then from there?
A man who ran a board game company called Skytrek, which was developing a good name for board games on historic themes. Chariot racing was one success that they had. And Skytrek's had a look at it. They're big man. They're man who ran Skytrek's, really. I mean, it's only like me running what became Tresham Games. Oh, yes. Well, I like the look of it, he says. Can I have half a dozen? Yes, I said, with pleasure.
And these were all handmade by you back then, right? Okay, all right.
The repeat order, of course, came in within a fortnight.
And from there, it just grew.
No, it just wanted more and more and more. And that way it got into the game by mail, which was an established game playing. Of course, not many of us had the chance to meet face to face all that frequently. So playing by mail was a good way of doing it. And 18XX is inherently a good game to play by mail because the rules are fairly straightforward and the moves you can make can easily be put down on a single sheet of paper.
Okay.
And so, yes, it was a natural for play by mail. And it wasn't designed with that idea in mind, but it became obvious that it was. Whereas diplomacy was a bit more complicated and civilization virtually impossible to play by mail. But some people still try doing it.
So from 1829, what made you decide to go with 1825, 1830? How did you decide, I want to do more of these?
Great British public.
Meaning there was just demand for it?
Yes.
And so you decided, hey, let's try another off this system?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. And
most of the things I've done have been on the basis, it looks good, let's do it.
it's a good way to be.
Makes you wish that Sir Donald Stokes, who ran the British Leyland, was working on the same philosophy, instead of which his entire policy was based on the size of his head, which was extremely large.
So what do you think about the fact that 18XX has grown to the size that it has now, all from what you started with 1829?
It's completely unpatentable, uncopyrightable on anything, because you can't copyright a number.
Right.
And so it's eternally free for absolutely everybody. And that, of course, what do they call it now? There is a term for public domain, isn't it?
Yep, public domain.
Richard will probably know. Public domain, is it? Yes.
Yep.
So it became public domain right from day one, enormously to the benefit of the game. And people will still buy it, even though they could say, it's public domain, just lend me your copy, I'll make a copy of it, which they could legally do. But no, they like a nice, bright, cheerful, colourful board with all the usual traditional sizes of hexagons, traditional sizes of how tiles intermesh and everything. For instance, you probably haven't seen one with single track tiles in it, have you?
Single track tiles, what do you mean by that?
They were a dash, black and white dashes instead of a continuous black line.
No.
For a railway line. No. Well, that came in at one stage, and so people suddenly find they can buy add-on kits that have got these sort of things in it. And people being people, and I bless them for it, they're great enthusiasts for what they have come to expect, and they like it that way. So I do it that way.
So do you enjoy the fact that the 18XX family that you started has grown to the size of the different
Of course I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I derive enormous pleasure from it. Somebody once asked me, and he was a very intelligent man, he was so intelligent that he set exam papers for degree level students in science subjects, chemistry I think it was. He says, does it make you very proud now? He says, you've been so successful. I said, no, not proud at all particularly. I'm pleased I've given so many people so much pleasure. That's all.
All right. Is there an 18XX that you either most enjoy playing or that you think is the most clever of the bunch that you're familiar with?
I want to play 1854.
What's that? Is that
1853 is out already. That's
right?
the Indian one.
Right. Is that
1854.
Austria? Which
You
one?
can look that up.
Okay, all right, fair enough, fair enough. So we went, so you have 1829, 1825, 1830, 1853, which you'll be happy to know, or interested maybe, but the 1853 is where you introduce the elephant in for the
Mountains
priority
and Three
deal.
Houses.
Right.
Heights.
So that
I love 1853.
that elephant that you put on there for the
know.
priority deal was the inspiration for our logo for our show.
Really?
Yeah, it really was. And so the
Well,
fact...
cough has gone on your
No,
mouth.
you're fine. You're good. So the
Yes.
fact...
I mean, 1853 is a lovely game to play. There's so much room there, so much scope. And there's so many challenges. Like... Well, a lot of them do make sense because you get a lot of rewards in odd places for being the first one to contact certain places, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
If you get up into the highlands round Assam and Bengal and that. And that's a challenge to the mind, that is. Yes, they're all challenges. So. Well, Eileen here likes playing Sudoku, is it?
Yeah.
Because it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
So which game are you most proud to have designed, or one that brings you the most pleasure that people enjoy the most?
Haven't the slightest idea. I think I'm watching a cup of coffee going cold. Do you think they'll hot it up for us? I'm sure they will if we wave at the right pleasant young lady.
Oh, here you go.
No,
It's water?
preferences are something that journalists just love. And sometimes it becomes obvious that there are things that definitely deserve to be preferences. During the war, World War II,
Mm-hmm.
there was a thing in Britain called the Air Transport Auxiliary. They were all women who knew how to fly and could fly well. And their job was quite simply delivering aircraft from maintenance parks or workshops or production lines to squadrons,
Mm-hmm.
or to squadron bases where stocks were held, you know.
Right.
And they all had a preference, which was the Spitfire. They said it's a beautiful thing to fly. So you never really want to fly anything else after that.
Everything else was a letdown.
That's
compared to
right,
that.
yes. They could fly almost anything. And a lot of them did. But no, they had a preference. And the preference came out very obviously.
Okay.
But that's fairly rare in actual practice.
So you don't have a favorite? They're kind of like your children, to where how can you have a favorite child, right?
No. No, you don't.
Okay. All right.
No. We have two granddaughters. And looking at the photograph of them, you wouldn't think butter would melt in their mouths. But as I've said to one of my friends, you'd be amazed looking at this picture. They can wind each other up. No, I wouldn't be amazed at all, he said, looking at the picture. he'd have daughters too, and
Right.
they could wind each other up, yes. And no, in some other fields, yes, I do have a definite preference. I definite preference for driving a bus with a pre-selector gearbox. That is a wonderful opportunity to make yourself look like a grandmaster at the game of designing buses, at the business of designing buses. You could go downhill to a roundabout where you can't see because of vegetation and buildings and that. Whether there's anything going to have precedence on the roundabout coming in from your right before you get there. So you go downhill in third and you select second before you get to the roundabout, but you certainly don't engage second. That's only appropriate to speeds up to about 10 miles an hour. But you've engaged second, you've selected second already. Engage third, because you go to use third anyway on the roundabout. Get to the roundabout, there's nothing in sight. Press down the gear change pedal into third. Nothing to it.
All right.
Lovely smooth downward gear change.
So what did you used to do before designing games?
What did I do for designing games?
Yeah, what did you do for a living?
Tried to earn a living.
Doing what?
Eileen and I got on well together, more or less all the time.
That wasn't to do with making a living.
This one?
That's nothing to do with making a living.
Well, you're an engineer, right?
I was an engineer, yes, in
For-
transport vehicles.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
Did you enjoy it?
yes,
Okay.
thoroughly. Yes. Being in industry is not usually what anybody outside that industry would think it was.
How so?
You tend to have less freedom of action. The people most in charge tend to be the people who should be least in charge. There's all sorts of reasons.
Okay. All right.
Yes, I'd love to run my own bus construction company. People said when I was a boy, this was the question I hated. What are you going to do when you grow up? That's a standard question. They'd ask my parents, if not me, what's he going to do when he grows up? And I would say be a farmer, because my father was a farmer, and it was the only safe way out I could think of. So I would say be a farmer. Oh, that got me off the hook. What I really wanted to do was to design board games and get involved in the production of buses. I've now got the Bristol RE under my belt, which I did all the stress work for and quite a lot of the performance testing, and civilization. Now try and follow that, as they say on vaudeville.
Right, seriously. So do you still play games?
Yes.
Well-
Get the chance?
Yeah. Well, what are some of your favorites that you enjoy playing? Or games that you still enjoy playing, I should say.
Varies.
Okay.
Quite like Revolution.
Dutch Revolt,
Yes.
one of your other designs.
That's right.
By the way, Uli wanted me to pass along. He said hello from who he helped develop the game after you
Really?
designed it. Yep.
This is Han Heidmer.
Uli Blenneman.
Uli Brenneman,
Yep,
yes, I
yep,
know him.
Yep. He was just at my convention last week.
Very good.
And yeah.
Yes.
So he wanted me to pass along, say
Well,
hello.
pass my regards back to him.
I will do so.
Yeah.
Most certainly. So do you still think about game design today, nowadays?
Still take a hand in designing games. Of course
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there anything still?
I've got one in the back of my mind at the moment.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to tell you what it is.
All right.
But, well, it's very nebulous at the moment. There's
Okay.
no guarantee it's going to work particularly well.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, I'm going to ditch it very quickly and get onto something that works better.
Fair enough. So, you have a son, Edmund, right? That he has tried his hand at designing games, I believe. Is he?
Not really, does a bit sometimes. but not-
Do you
not
think?
particularly.
Do you
Well,
think
he
he'll?
lives away from home.
Do you think he'll follow in your footsteps?
No,
And
no, he won't.
no. Okay.
No. You see, my father had great passions in life.
You're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Great passions in life, which I didn't share. And I was quite determined not to inflict mine on young Edmund.
Okay.
And father's passions in life were ballroom dancing, Tory politics, and can't remember what the third one was. Fox hunting.
Okay. Things you're not terribly into.
No interest in it at all.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
My son is now executive in a small bus company.
So let's talk about 1825. Is there anything else planned for that as far as
18XX games, definitely.
Okay, but anything new for 1825?
Yes, 1854.
Okay. Okay. All right. So when
Richard will tell you what it is when he's got one in his hand.
okay,
Is that my coffee?
it is.
It is. Well, thank you very much, dear lady. That's very kind of you. It looks as if it's benefited enormously from the place where it has been. Thank you.
So
Did you wave at the lady to bring? Yes, well, there we are. You see, this is the point. I have the most wonderful friends.
there's something to
I
be
really
said for
do.
that.
I have the most wonderful friends.
Enjoy your coffee. Go ahead.
Yes, I shall have it while it's warm. I think I've manoeuvred myself out of the worst pitfalls of this interview.
So 1831. Is there any? Somebody asked about that, and I would.
1831. Is there an 1831?
Ireland.
Oh, yes.
Oh yes, Ireland. Yes.
Any?
There's also an 1837,
Okay.
which I think is Ireland.
Okay. Is there any update on any of that?
No, not really.
Okay.
I'll try and satisfy the demand for what is already lying around in large quantities of bits and pieces in our garage. First of all,
Okay.
which I should be working on, rather than living it up with the cognoscenti.
So there's a gentleman by the name of Alan Howe who, when I told people that I was going to be sitting down
Alan
having a
Howe is
conversation,
a very knowledgeable man on games.
yes, he said he's one of the editing contributors or whatnot of Counter Magazine, or used to be. He wrote something here, and I wanted to read it and get your take
Did
on
I?
this.
Yes, well, I haven't met Alan now, haven't seen Alan for a long period of time. I'd like to see him again, but I think his interests have probably swung off in a rather different direction.
Well, he said that many years ago you had some amazing designs at various stages of development. He said, if I remember right, there were over 50 games that you had in various
I
stages.
think that could be right,
Okay, all right.
but a lot of them are only in large manila envelopes in a drawer in my desk.
Okay.
But
He
yes,
said
they could be brought out if the time was ripe, and I had the time.
He said the ones that I wished had been published included a game about a dragon moving across terrain that moved as the dragon moved off the board.
Yes, that was good. That was. Yes. Yes, that was particularly funny. That was. Yes. You had a party of people, adventurers, 4 or 5, different pawns, you know, and your colour pawns were different colours to somebody else's coloured pawns, and the boards were orthographic, where they met into it. They were like glorified huge games tiles, really, but I think they were square, so they could be teamed together easily enough. And there were advantages in having a gang of people together, because you didn't want to meet a superior gang coming the other way of another party, you see. And if you were the last one left on the board went and you lost your man. That was quite serious.
He said the second game was about generations of people, development of stately homes, and going overseas to India, he said. He said, is there any possibility you ever get those to market?
I don't think he should have been shown that.
Then never mind. All right, fair enough. All right.
No, it's all right. I mean, anything said across the table at these sort of do's, as Richard will bear out, say, oh, well, he's full of ideas, but hardly ever do any of them come to fruition. So he said, he would say, I shouldn't pay too much attention to that. His ideas come and go.
Okay, all right. So let's see, some other friends of mine that ask questions. So a friend of mine, Brian, who is the biggest Civilization fan that I have ever met, between him and another friend of mine, Mike, says to anyone who was gaming during the 1980s, Civilization was and is an immensely important and influential game. Sadly, these days, it seems that getting a group of 6 to 7 people together for 5 to 8 hours is becoming less and less common.
5 or 6 hours?
Or, well, that's
12 or 14.
I was being, you're right, 100%. He says, what do you think of the trend over the last decade or decade and a half of games skewing to smaller player counts and shorter play times?
Well, we went to one place that we'd been playing a game. I think it was an 18XX variant. It might have been a Civilization variant. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, it was because these games tended to be lengthy that we photographed the game and the board.
Oh, and then put it up and then bring it back.
The next day. Next time, a week or fortnight later.
Okay. So you think...
they've changed the carpet. Change the carpet? No, we don't change the carpet. We realised we got the wrong photograph.
That's funny. That's funny. Oh, wait, no, that was last game.
Yes.
So...
Yes.
All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't try to ask. So there's a series of 6 questions that I ask everybody that I interview. Okay, so there are.
Carry on.
All right, so here we go. So we'll see how this goes.
Here we go.
All right, so number 1.
Warm coffee.
How old would you be if you didn't know how old you are?
Well, I have to work it out. I was born in 36.
Okay.
That's 64 in last year, and we add up what it is in last century.
Right.
Add on what it is in this year.
So 64 and 18,
64 and
that'd be
18,
82.
82, yeah.
Right, but how old do you think you are? Not age-wise, but how old, if you didn't know that you were 82?
Depends what sort of day I'm having.
That's actually a really fair
I'm
question.
looked after incredibly well, and I have some wonderful friends, of whom my wife is certainly one, keeps me on the even keel and going in the right direction. And people like Richard are wonderfully good at it as well, in their own specific way.
Totally, and can't understate.
I'm pretty happy, really.
All right, well, I gather, plus good coffee. If you could master one skill in your entire life that you never did, what would it have been?
Oh, yes, there are ones. I've never driven a steam locomotive. I would certainly jump at the chance to do that.
Okay.
I've ticked off one or two others at times and enjoyed them.
Okay. Driving a steam locomotive, that's a first for this, but I like that. That's a really good answer.
Well, if I'd got the chance, I would certainly pick that one up.
Okay.
And before I'd had the opportunity, I'd have said driving a bus with a pre-selector gearbox, but I've done that now, and it was it was all it could have been.
Okay. If you could have dinner and conversation with any person in history, who would it be?
I don't know quite. I hadn't expected that one. Adolf Hitler?
Okay.
Possibly. I should probably encounter him one day, because a group of us have firm belief in the inevitability of what we call the fifth force. Because there is, and this effectively is really what drives me on, there's the strong and the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and the force of gravity. Those 4 forces are accepted by all conventional physicists as being incontrovertible, and they're there, and they can measure them, and they know what they are. Say, yes, what about the 5th force? Oh, there isn't one, they say. I said, well, how do butterflies migrate for thousands of miles to breeding sites they have never seen? Why do people fall in love? How do you identify something that you've never been told is dangerous and should be left alone? All these sort of things. And they're all part of the 5th force. The 5th force, we don't know how big it is, we don't know how widespread it is. It's there. There is a 5th force, yes, there is a 5th force.
Okay.
And when I pass on, I'm quite sure I shall meet a lot of people, historic and otherwise. I'm looking forward to meeting the ace French locomotive designer, André Chapelon.
Why is that?
Well, partly because I have the greatest respect for his abilities as a designer of steam locomotives, and partly because I don't believe he got it right in why compounding is superior to ordinary simple expansion. And I'm sure my long deceased vicar friend will introduce me to André Chapelon, and he'll say,
And you can have a conversation with
have a
him.
conversation. You know, I was to say, André, sorry to have to say this, but you actually got it wrong. And explain why he got it wrong.
Awesome.
And why he got it wrong was really quite simple. In fact, it's very difficult to follow what he was trying to get at when he explained it. But anyway, he got it wrong.
Okay.
Basically, the thing is that you don't heat things up and cool them down unnecessarily if you're designing a heat engine, because that is probably going to be a waste of heat somewhere. Heat is energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I shall have to explain it to him in the nicest possible way. No, I don't think it was a matter of conservation of this, that or the other. The other one, the other remarkable thing is that the great thing that is accepted by the better, and there are very, very few of them, locomotive designers, is why the Uniflow engine was so successful. And most of the reasons you get for that bear no relation to the Uniflow engine at all. It's very successful. I shall have to go back and swat up on my notes now to remind myself of what the Uniflow engine actually does. But again, it's the same sort of principle. Don't heat things up and cool them down unnecessarily. Run them at the same temperature if you can, as long as you can.
Okay. All right. So what are 3 things you want more of right now? Anything. Could be anything.
Be a bit quiet on this one, I think. I think there are a few. No, I'm not going into them.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. What do you
Pretty
appreciate?
happy, actually.
Oh, that's important. That's good. What do you appreciate most in your friends? Because you mentioned your beautiful wife, you mentioned Richard, so on and so forth. But what's the one thing you most appreciate in your friends?
In friends, the fact that they're my friends and we get on so well together.
Fair enough.
Eileen keeps finding new ones all the time.
All right, my very last question. All right, what's your absolute dream job?
Which are absolutely what?
Oh, your dream job. What would be the one thing that you most wanted to do in life?
Well, they won't let me do solo jumps.
A parachute,
Because
you mean?
I'm rated to being too old. Be all right if I could do a reaction test. Yes, I'll do a reaction test anytime you like. Being quite sure that I would pass it. My reactions are pretty good, actually.
Okay.
And they said, well, it doesn't matter whether you pass it or not. At your age, we're not going to let you do a solo jump. Oh, blow that. I'm not going to spend £25 if you're not going to let me do a solo jump anyway. So.
Fair enough.
And you ought to have seen the wizened old character who told me this. I'm sure I could out reaction him any day of the week.
Good stuff. Well, I appreciate it, Francis, for you taking the time. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you.
All right. So.
Have I lifted anything out?
Probably.
Awesome. All right.